On behalf of MHI Vestas Offshore Wind, we would like to introduce you to the Visionary Debate Series today. MHI Vestas decided to sponsor this Visionary Debate Series is because one of the main things we'd like to do, we like to bring in new thoughts into the industry. And so this series of debates, we've invited people from outside of the wind industry or people that would perhaps not normally find at a wind conference in order to help come with some inspirational thoughts and some, I guess, there are new opinions into the industry and see what we can do within the industry and see what ideas can be generated from a fresh perspective. And that's also what we try to do as a company. Anyway, without any further ado, I would like to introduce Chris Burns to the stage and the panelist for today's topic on business and climate change.
Okay, please. Thank you very much, Stuart. I have the luxury of 45 minutes to talk about this with the MHI Vestas Visionary Debate Series. I usually have only 10 minutes on my Euronews show. That's three people, 10 minutes, start a fight. We have 45 minutes to get not only the panel involved, but you as well. As much as possible, if you have any comments or questions, we want to go to you as much as possible. We have a roving mic, so let's do it. As they're taking their place, I'd like to mention that yesterday we talked about energy and the energy markets. The day before, on the first day, we talked about urban issues and how cities are adapting to climate change and also to these new commitments that are being made to try to cut CO2. Today, we're going to be talking about Paris and the Energy Summit, the global warming summit, where we hope to see an agreement that's going to make strong commitments in the future, that is going to also give your businesses predictability in the next few decades and how to adapt to that as well. How are businesses adapting to climate change? How are businesses adapting to and making commitments for cutting CO2? That's what we want to talk about today. We'll have Sandrine Dixon de Clèves on the far end here. She's director of the EU office for the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. Rui Teixeira is a member of the EDP Renováveis in Portugal, and Vanessa Miller-Fels, Energy Portfolio Manager for Microsoft. I always like to start out with a couple of headlines when we begin this debate, and one of them is actually an announcement that was made here at this very expo about how 16 companies are joining together to double renewables by 2025. This is under the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And that's a very, very significant move. We've seen this time and again by companies in different countries getting together and making a commitment. We've got more than 150 countries making commitments ahead of this Paris Climate Summit, which is also very encouraging. Another headline is a dozen Australian companies signed to fight against climate change. Dozens of the world's largest companies, including Microsoft, have joined with the White House, a White House initiative to curb greenhouse gas emissions and invest in clean energy. And one more headline is Nature magazine. Here's talking about the impact of climate change. And this is quite disturbing. A 23% drop in world GDP by 2100 if we don't get busy now. So this is very, very interesting on the impact, the threat, the risk, and the opportunities of adapting to climate change. Let's start with the idea of trends in the business world. What changes do we see happening? We see a new consensus on sustainability, don't we, Sandrine?
I think we not only see a new consensus on sustainability, and I've been told that I need to get more people over here, so I'm going to speak really loudly and hope that more of you join this wonderful debate. I think what's really interesting is how we've moved away from a Copenhagen kind of managing expectations, more of a potential disaster outcome, to a completely collaborative push towards decarbonization across a variety of different sectors. So really, I think the big news is business as usual is out.
Right.
The new business as usual is in, both for sustainability as well as decarbonization. And this comes from the supply side as well as the demand side. So across a variety of different businesses, we're hearing at the Prince of Wales Corporate Leaders Group and through our network of thousands of businesses that businesses believe that it makes good sense to innovate, to decarbonize, and to become more efficient in terms of their business models. And I would say that is becoming a global trend, not just a European trend.
Let's take an example. Thanks, Edwin. Let's take an example with Vanessa at Microsoft. How Microsoft is adapting to this, has actually joined in. I don't think you've been in denial ever on this issue, have you?
No, I mean, it's a huge issue. So data centers, and that's the division I represent at Microsoft, account for nearly 2% of US energy consumptions globally. So that's massive. I mean, if data centers energy consumption were to be transported into like a country, it would be the 20th largest energy country in the world. And it's growing like every year by about 50%. So we're definitely aware of like our impact, our carbon footprint impact.
And to adapt to that, you've reached agreements with renewable energy companies to provide your energy, correct?
Exactly. So Microsoft first has decided to become carbon neutral as of 2012. And we've adopted an internal carbon tax, which is very different than a lot of corporations have just said. They factor in a carbon tax in their projections and in their forecasting. But
so you're carbon neutral already? You said 2012.
We're carbon neutral, and in a way several companies are also. We're offsetting our carbon footprint. But the idea is to go beyond by reducing our carbon footprint.
Right.
And there's two ways you can do that. I mean, energy efficiency has always been very key for data centers. And the other main way we're addressing it is by looking at what energy is powering our data center and what comes into the grid. And so if you're 80% fossil fuel, well, our carbon footprint is really bad. So we're trying to shift that and get more and more renewables to power a data center.
Rui, I think we talked about this before, about a long-term energy strategy, and this seems to fit in that. I mean, how much willingness do you see from companies like Microsoft and others to reach long-term agreements with companies like yours to produce and consume renewable energy?
Yeah. I think it's going to be absolutely key. Actually, the announcement that is made today with the support of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development is that through this partnership, the Low Carbon Technology Initiative, the 16 companies that are bringing together an announcement that it is possible to have an additional 1.5 terawatts of renewables capacity. And that would be in itself a way to promote the goals of limiting the temperature of the globe by 2 degrees centigrades. Now, to do that, 4 things need to happen. One of them is that we need to establish a long-term power purchase agreement with corporates more than what we are doing right now. So less reliability on governments and utilities and definitely less reliability on any sort of subsidies.
Right.
And much more linking what is the competitiveness of these technologies right now, particularly wind, and matching that with the need that companies such as Microsoft, but others within the technology space, retailers, industrials, have to create a visibility on the long term of their supply of electricity, what is at what price they will get that, and effectively a competitive price vis-a-vis what the market can offer right now on a long-term basis.
Now, there are challenges here. There is resistance. You can name names if you want. We can talk about this. Let's make it a powwow. Who is holding us back on this, and how do you persuade these companies and governments to sign on and do something about this? Sandrine, this has been your job, really, is to show companies that it is to their benefit to pursue this track of renewable energy, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to name names. But what I will do is talk about a little bit of a fight between the incumbents and the new entrants. And I think we do need to understand that our energy systems are incredibly complex. They have been set up with certain structures in place for many, many, many years, predominantly based on fossil fuel energy. To totally transition from fossil fuel energy to both renewables and more demand-side management is a huge feat. So I don't think we can just indicate across the board, whether it be governments or businesses, that it's easy. And I think there are different ways in which we need to move forward. The first is that we need to partner with governments in order to suggest the types of policy that are going to enable more innovation and new technologies and existing technologies that decarbonize to come forward. So that's the first.
Tax incentives or subsidies or what?
Tax incentives are definitely part of it. Subsidies, I think we need to be careful. I think that most of the renewables industry has been saying for a while, we don't necessarily need subsidy schemes.
What about feed-in tariffs?
Hold on.
Feed-in tariffs.
As long as we have a level playing field. And that means elimination of fossil fuel subsidies. It means elimination of both indirect and direct assistance to high fossil or high carbon energy. If we can create a level playing field for those technologies that are already here on the market for renewables, not breakthrough technologies, because there we will need new subsidies, then I think that will work. The last indication I think that's very important is to start to show that we can work across sectors, across different businesses, the supply and the demand side, to come up with solutions to really penetrate the market and make it work.
How much, Vanessa, how much is this an opportunity for Microsoft to actually save money, and how much is this just good PR, good, corporate social responsibility? Is this really to your benefit, or do you also, as some companies, face a competitive, maybe disadvantage initially to adopting this kind of policy?
I mean, sure, there is a need to adapt, and this today was released a report from BlackRock about the price of climate change, and this is definitely something that now businesses have to factor in.
That's quite significant. I don't know if you've heard about this, but this headline we saw, BlackRock, this is amazing. Private equity making a study about climate change. Very interesting. But go ahead.
And so this is a journey we've gone through. I mean, basically fixing a price on carbon is a way to say we acknowledge that climate risk and we have to factor in our business case. So if you take the carbon price, that definitely links to why we would want to finance more renewables. Then there's something that Rue mentioned. I mean, we love the idea of having a fixed price on our energy supply, particularly when our growth, when we're facing such growth. But we have to be able to manage the upside of the energy market and the downside of the energy market. And that's where we're trying as many solutions as we can. So PPA is one of them, but we're also looking at different things with utilities, with regulatory framework. And we know, I mean, we also have to get to such scale that we'll have to engage with all partners and be innovative. And that's also something that Microsoft is focusing a bit more on lately, is how can we kind of bring some of the kind of the essence of Microsoft, I mean innovation and machine learning, to the energy space, and how can we benefit from that? Okay,
so you do see in the long run this is going to pay off, because I mean you got stockholders you got to look over your shoulder at, right? This has got to make sense to a stockholder.
This has to make sense. And I mean, it's also all about risk mitigation. So we're creating a portfolio from our energy supply perspective that is risk mitigated. So some will be more renewables, and we think that in the long term, the contracts we've signed on renewables are going to pay off. But it's also a way to mitigate whatever exposure we have with other kinds of energy or whatever other contracts we have to power our data centers.
I mean, in addition, just as an aside, I'm just curious myself, Bill Gates, we know that he's fairly socially committed on a number of issues. Was he one of the people in the company who said, let's make this happen?
I mean, there's definitely discussions, but not that I'm aware of. He's left the company quite a bit ago. But he has his own kind of Microsoft Ventures and other initiatives that are very interested in climate change and in energy particularly.
Would anybody like to make a comment or a question at this point about, yes, Giles, please. Of the European Wind Energy Association. Let's get him a mic here. Here we go.
Thank you very much indeed. I have a question to Vanessa. Is the rest of US big business coming on board? And if they are they going to get the people they finance in the Republican Party on board as well?
Oh, there's a loaded political question, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm not going to comment on American politics first. I'm not American. I'm French, so that would be completely inappropriate. And I don't know enough about American politics really to allow that. But I'm sure, if you want to comment on that. But otherwise, I do think that other corporations are definitely moving forward, and we have joined a couple of kind of association or coalition of companies in the US, particularly, I don't know if you've heard of the Renewables Energy Buyers Group Principle that was launched by WWF and the World Resource Institute, and that gathers most of the tech companies and a lot of retail companies like Walmart, but also Equinix on the data center side, for example.
Companies.
So big companies that are pushing to find a way to source more PPAs for their own facilities. And the issue, I will say there, for companies to find solution, there's really a question of scale. Not every company can find its own solution. The market has also to offer it, and the government has also to offer it.
So there's a government
role. Not
role
everybody can deal with a PPA. Even for Microsoft, it was a very, very long journey. It took a couple years to figure it out. So.
Okay, I think Sandrine, you wanted to add to that,
yeah,
right?
I just wanted to add that Vanessa's absolutely correct, and I would say that because of the new US pledge actually coming from hundreds of companies who have signed on to actually moving forward on climate change, I think that's huge. That's the first clear indicator that we got from a large force of companies in the US starting to say that this makes business sense. There also has been a huge amount of effort from the investment community in the US that are starting to look at divestment and that are also looking very much at a transitionary scenario moving towards more investment in low carbon. So I think both of those are indicators. To come back to the politics, though, I would say that if you take the Texan situation of the amount of investment now in renewables, I think that some of the Republicans are starting to see the real benefit of moving to a new business scenario. Will they make the links between that and climate change? Probably not. And I think that's the key issue now, is to start to see if there's a step change within the politics in the US around decarbonization and climate change.
Now, one other headline I might mention as we go to our next question here is another headline today. BNP Paribas, I think it was from today, announces that it is going to divest itself from fossil fuels. That's quite significant as well. I mean, we're seeing people jumping on the bandwagon ahead of the Paris Climate Summit. Very interesting. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Jan Stam. I am from the European Wind Energy Master. And I have a question concerning business and the upcoming COP21.
These are all students here, right? Studying to become masters in wind energy. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, one of you is going to be the next commissioner for energy, I think, in, well, maybe about 10 years, right? So watch these guys. Okay.
Anyway, there's been some interesting news lately concerning Exxon and their position or their knowledge about the climate change, considering the upcoming COP21 and the position with business and politics in terms of lobbying and whether or not they should be involved or not. Do you think it's important that they make a stand concerning COP21? Should there, for instance, be something done about corporate responsibility? Should COP21 force it, stimulate it? Something in this area, maybe?
Vanessa, what do you like to take that?
I mean, COP21 is going to be a key momentum. I mean, it's going to certainly give an impulse to all these discussions, and hopefully the commitment of the private sector has been a key issue for COP21 and for the preparation of COP21. So I think this is not. It's not benign that BNP Paribas announced today that they're divesting 15 billion by 2020, and we're going to see in the next couple of weeks a lot of engagement from private sector. And we all expect a lot from the COP21 in terms of setting a bit the path for the future. So we are definitely going to participate in COP21 and be very attentive to what's going to happen there.
Rui, I'd like to first go to you. I know, Sandrine, you want to say something, but I mean, we've talked about a couple of days ago about long-term public-private, right? And could this be, long-term public-private, be a way to get some companies that perhaps don't have the wherewithal to do this, that could encourage them to join in this effort?
Sure, and actually I think that, for example, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development in itself creates a space where companies with different sizes can actually participate and be heard. But just, I'd like to make two comments. One is related to the COP21 in itself. I do believe that right now, regardless of what can be an international agreement between governments, we have a huge momentum from corporates, and regardless of if we have the oil majors involved or not, at this point there is a huge momentum from different sectors large and small, medium-sized companies, actually saying we want to do this because we see it as a risk mitigating, because we see it as a business opportunity, because we believe in it, but we want to do it. So actually that builds up pressure in governments to try to reach an agreement. Whether we'll get that agreement or not, honestly, I don't know, but at least I'm seeing that there is a commitment from companies to do that. And just one small comment regarding the market structure and level playing field. I do believe that at this point, renewables, and particularly wind, are competitive, which means that whenever renewables participate in an auction, and compete with conventional technologies, if the site is a good windy site, renewables win. Wind is the lowest levelized cost of energy that we have right now in terms of technology, which means that it's a matter of energy matrix for the country to decide how much wind or not does it need to have in terms of its own penetration. But what I do believe is that the current market design has to change because the current market design is based on electricity, and we need to move away from this because the more we introduce technologies which are zero marginal cost technologies, the worse these markets behave, and so they don't provide the right sign for the next investment.
You're actually talking about the price of CO2, right? We have to have a real price of CO2 that reflects the social cost.
In one hand, price of CO2, but also on the other hand, if nowadays any investor would look to the pool prices that exist across Europe and actually in the US, no one would decide to invest a single euro in new capacity. Why? Because those markets right now, they don't reflect what is the effective cost of producing electricity on a marginal basis.
Exactly. This must be something you face perhaps rather often with some companies that say, well, look, the price of carbon is not high enough for me to do anything. Yeah. Why should I act?
So I'll come to that. Okay. Well, I'll start with that one maybe first.
Okay.
We were one of the first working on carbon pricing 10 years ago, and we actually put forward now just a report on ETS since the beginning.
Emissions trading system, we all know.
We've grown for the last 10 years with the emissions trading scheme as being one of the core business groups that actually engaged in that scheme. It's not working. No, it's very clear. Yeah. We need to reform the system. We need to look at what is working. Carbon pricing, absolutely, the price has to go up. It does need to reflect both the social and environmental externalities. And the only way to do that is to tighten the system with regard to allowances, to also ensure that we don't give too many allowances as much as possible to those industries that don't necessarily need them. So that's what we call the carbon leakage discussion.
Right.
And in addition to that, we need to look at a variety of other frameworks. And Ray is absolutely right. Yesterday, Vice President Šefčovič announced his State of the Union for the Energy Union.
Right.
So the conversation that we're having now also needs to be brought back in very clearly into the Energy Union conversation, because Vice President Šefčovič is asking digital companies and others to come together and help him in establish a low-carbon energy union. So that's the first thing. Coming back to COP21, I think we really need to remember two things. The discourse that companies have now with the UNFCCC has totally changed since Copenhagen. It is not a lobbying environment, it is a partnership environment. And Christiana Figueres, who is the head of the UNFCCC, has come out very clearly and said, with all the non-state actor commitments, many of them that Vanessa, you have mentioned or that have been mentioned before, we can start to see how that coupled up with the nationally determined commitments will get us to 2 degrees. So we've entered into a brand new era of working on climate change and meeting our goals. And it's one where we're going to do them intimately together rather than just lobbying in a few corridors in the UNFCCC. That's gone. Those days are totally gone. And I would say, no, I prefer not seeing Exxon in the corridors of the UNFCCC. I don't think it makes a difference. We've moved on. And I think that's what people need to talk about. We're talking about a brand new economy. The new climate economy report has indicated this. We've had so many other reports, whether it be from the WBCSD, from a technical perspective. So let's move towards a new climate economy, what it brings to us, and the positives around really putting in place the right opportunities for business.
Can I ask among the audience, I mean, how much are you persuaded that business is really behind fighting climate change, and how do you think they're really committed? Are businesses really committed to fighting climate change, do you think? We don't see a lot. We see a lot of skepticism, including among the students here. Yeah, that's. So, I think there's ground to be made here. I think to try to advance that, and companies like Microsoft and those that Sandrine works with will try to persuade others to follow along. And I think it also probably pretty key what kind of agreement we see here in Paris in December. I can't believe the time has flown so fast. We have only 10 minutes left. And there's so much more ground I wanted to cover. I think there was something about green bonds that we wanted to cover very, very quickly. I mean, again, it's providing the money for these companies to give them a reason to want to invest. How does green bonds work?
Right. I think green bonds will need to get a push. Not obvious that green bonds are having the success right now that people thought they would have. Some companies have issued green bonds, so it's a reality. To what extent those companies are getting a premium vis-a-vis issuing a normal bond, it's not obvious. But what I do believe is the following. As long as we can improve how companies demonstrate that effectively that investment is to support the growth of a greener economy, and in particular renewables. As long as these renewables development are based on long-term contracts with corporates that provide a good counterparty risk, provide visibility on the revenues for the future, and as long as we can show that we are redeploying that capital into new investments, again, green investments, it's a question of having not only the sustainable, responsible investors looking into this type of green bonds, but also having, in general, different institutional investors and ultimately the public, the retail, also demanding for this type of bonds. Because in essence, what they would be is a demonstration that that particular business is being funded at market prices, if not at a premium, but with a reason. But then the reason would be to invest in new renewables.
Is this something that Microsoft has looked at, this green bonds with governments, public-private?
Not necessarily as an investor, but we're definitely thinking that when we engage in a PPA and we're AAA, and we engage in a 20-year contract, there's definitely something interesting in green bonds or yieldcos to leverage these contracts and these PPAs. So.
Is that a persuasive argument for some companies that you're dealing with to try to get them on board?
I don't think it's a persuasive argument, but I do think that it will leverage, if we can start to have some private sector offerings, whether it be green bonds or actually long-term investment through the pension plans. We look at Dong Energy, for example, a wind producer who's not been looking at green bonds, but more looking at long-term investment in the wind sector directly with the Danish pension plans. And I think that the long-term potential through the institutional investors is actually even more exciting than the green bond market. What I would say is we have to be very careful that in Europe we don't lose out on the green bond market. Right now the largest green bond market is China. And so we have to ensure that we continue to evolve in not only the possibilities in terms of the financial instruments that we put in place, but also the public leveraging from some of the banks like the European Investment Bank and also the EBRD.
That's what that brings me to the next question is from EIB and the Juncker plan. How much do you see the Juncker plan, which has been widely flagged by the Commission and the EU as being almost the silver bullet for the economy? Do you see that? How much do you see that playing a role in promoting renewable energy? Rui, let's go to Rui.
Well, I guess that at this point, I mean, the promotion of renewables, honestly, I do believe that it's going to be done by its own merit. And its own merit means that it's going to be demonstrated by the fact that as long as it becomes more and more efficient, then it has its own space to grow.
So it doesn't matter what governments are doing there, really?
Honestly, I think that the main thing that governments should do is just to be very clear on what are the rules of engagement. Okay. They need to be clearly set up front, and once they are set up front, and honestly, I do believe that more and more we should have ex-ante competition, so there is no questioning about feed-in tariffs or any administrative determination of the price. Let the renewables play in a competitive environment ex-ante. through auctions, competitive process, and then if they demonstrate that they are competitive as they are, they will have its own space to grow. So the point is that it's not only about setting up targets, it's just let the market work from an economic standpoint.
Unless you want to add to that, I have one more question. We got like 3 minutes left, but I could go maybe a couple of minutes over time if need be. Are there any other questions or comments to be made? Another question that I would have is about binding targets. People talk about that this climate change summit should come up with binding targets. Others say, well, they're not really enforceable anyway. But do we not need something that sets more than targets, that forces people to do this? With the threat that there might be more regulation. Isn't this what's persuading companies to act now? But do we need more assertiveness from governments to say, this is what we got to do over the next 20 years? Vanessa.
Yeah, I definitely think that both in the European side and in America with the Clean Power Plan that was released a couple months ago, and now we'll see like unfolding in the next couple months in the US, are key elements to engage corporation to do things. I mean, without the binding targets in Europe by 2020 and by 2030, I don't think businesses would have stepped in that significantly.
So that was necessary, that leadership role.
And everybody is talking about the CPP in any corporations in America right now. We don't necessarily know what it will entail, but we know that something, I mean, it will definitely change the course of business.
If you want to do business in Europe, you got to go by those rules. But is that going to be enough? You know, there are a lot of companies that argue in Europe and say, this great to set those goals, but that puts us at a competitive disadvantage to the rest of the world. Sandrine.
Well, I think there are two things around the binding target. First of all, that analysis of whether you should have voluntary or binding agreements has always demonstrated that binding is much more ferocious in actually getting something done. So that's the first thing. The second is it's not just having a binding target, it's the level of the binding target. So the clear criticism here from the renewables industry and from the energy efficiency industry has been that the binding target for 2030 is not high enough to really stimulate change if we're going to go to a step change. We have a binding target around greenhouse gas emissions reductions of at least 40% by 2030. And I think the key question now is going to be, do we top up that 27% renewables if we want to go more than 40%? And I think that's key. And we're not going to get a binding target at the international level. Forget that. We now have commitments coming from regions and nations across the world. It is those commitments and their implementation which are going to set the tone now for the industry across the globe. In a European context, exactly as Vanessa said, it's making sure that our 2030 targets are implemented in the member states. And my conversation with Giles just over lunch, and it stunned me, was that there are only 4 to 5 member states that have actually implemented the renewables target. That's a scandal. So we have to work now at the member state level to ensure that this gets done.
And in the long run, in the long run, it does make sense to do this. In the long run, it could make Europe more competitive by adopting these targets, no?
Absolutely. And the problem is, if we don't continue to evolve and we continue to let those background voices say that we are not competitive because we're moving in this direction, then we will start to lose our competitive edge, because the reality is the world is moving on. China, the US, they are moving on. So to remain competitive, we need to ensure we stimulate these new industries.
Sandrine Dixon de Clèves, Vanessa Miller-Fels, and Rui Teixeira, thank you very much for joining us. This was a great conversation. We're going to continue tomorrow talking about the future of industry and manufacturing. Hope to see you tomorrow. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.